Welcome to NYNJPA Weather, your weather source for the Northern Mid-Atlantic. And this is your weekend forecast update for December 17th, 2010. And boy, do we have a lot to talk about. Well, basically what we have going on is the question of whether we'll have a storm on Sunday or not. Well, first let's look at the surface map. Our low pressure system that produced some light snow over southern New Jersey is now over the Atlantic and starting to intensify. That low pressure center will be the first part of what should be a very interesting weekend moving forward. Now notice the area low pressure over the southwest. That's our second part. That is one part of our major storm, or no storm, depending on how everything works out in the Pacific and the Atlantic. In the meantime, for today and for tomorrow, disturbances will continue to move through the northern Atlantic with a few isolated flurries here and there, but for the most part dry conditions can be expected, with temperatures averaging below normal once again in the lower to mid 30s. Now let's look at the different pieces for this potential storm on Sunday. What's real, what's not, and what can we expect. The model guidance the past 24 hours have gone from nothing to major snowstorm, even blizzard, to nothing again. And the reason why is because the models are having a difficult time handling the various disturbances that are moving off of the Pacific. We have first, as you remember, the gatekeeper that is over the Gulf of Alaska. Now this upper level low this morning is dropping due south. The idea here on the model guidance that suggests a further east trajectory with almost no impact of a storm is that this upper level low will creep towards the west coast and basically suppress the upper level ridge over the Rockies. Now eventually this will happen. The disturbance will move in and basically crush this ridge over the west, which is normal for La Niñas. But the question is when? And that is one of the major differences between model guidance that has a moderate to major snowstorm over the northern Atlantic and ones that do not. And the honest truth is that the ability to gather data for this upper level low is very difficult, and depending on what model you look at, for example the NAM doesn't always have the best resolution when it comes to storms and disturbances coming off the west coast because of the way that it ingests data. Meanwhile, other models like the European model guidance does a little bit better job, but if anything's missing, the whole solution goes out the window. So what's key here is exactly how does this upper level low dive to the south along the west coast. If it remains off the west coast again, it allows a major storm to develop because the whole pattern is more amplified. If it moves into the Pacific Northwest and starts to suppress the ridge on Saturday night, the whole storm is forced east. So that's the first part of our storm, and to be honest, the model guidance really doesn't have a good handle on this and likely won't until Saturday night. So we could actually see a major change in the model guidance Saturday night. We've seen it before and it can happen again. Now let's move a little bit further to the east into the Atlantic. Now in the Atlantic the setup is a little bit different. It's a little bit better handled, let's just say, because it's pretty obvious. There's a high latitude block over Greenland and parts of northeastern Canada, and a developing 50-50 millibar low developing over the northwestern Atlantic. And basically we have weakness over the northwestern Atlantic. So overall, this slows the pattern down just enough to basically support the potential for a area low pressure along the east coast to slow down and impact the northern Mid-Atlantic and New England. Now, this does not guarantee a storm moving up the coast, but it does set up the possibility for one. Again, if the pattern is more progressive on the west coast, this disturbance that is moving through the southern plains now and the disturbance that's moving through the northwest Canada right now will have no choice but to exit to the east. But having this in place is an important key factor to this forecast. This disturbance over the southern plains is very interesting to me. The reason why is because the model guidance that has basically the storm out into the ocean and relatively weak has this disturbance basically collapsing over the next 12 hours. Of course, thus far, this disturbance is stronger than what model guidance has been suggesting. Just ask anyone over the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles who have seen some moderate to heavy snow this morning. So this disturbance has been under forecasted, but let's just assume that the disturbance does eventually fall apart. Well, what that means is that the disturbance that is moving from the northwest basically has nothing to phase with, and so the low pressure system is poorly organized. It doesn't have any real reason to shift to a negative position in the trough axis, and so the storm meanders out into the Atlantic without much of an impact. Even if the west coast upper level low remained off the west coast, the impact would be minimal at best. But everything's connected. You see, the upper level low over the Pacific, if it stays off the coast, that means that the pattern overall is more amplified. If the pattern overall is more amplified, that means this disturbance over the southern plains remains amplified. And if that remains amplified, then you have a better chance for a negatively tilted trough and a more powerful storm. So what do I think is going to happen? Well, to be honest, I wish I knew. The fact of the matter is that this type of pattern, this type of setup is extremely dynamic, and a shift by 50 miles either way of any of these disturbances creates a drastically different solution. And the model guidance, because I know everyone loves to follow the model guidance run by run, can change in an instant depending on the position of each one of these disturbances and the intensity of each one of these disturbances. So right now, my suggestion is that anyone to the west of the Delaware River likely will not see much of an impact from this storm. That could change, like I said, but right now I would not bet against the idea that most of the interior will miss the storm. If you're along the coast, you are basically on a thin ice between having nothing and having a major snowfall. We're talking about New York City, the immediate New Jersey coast, Connecticut, New England. The difference in the forecast is really that slim. So right now, if you're planning anything for Sunday, look for the potential for accumulating snowfall along the immediate coast. And of course, I will keep an eye on this developing storm as we move forward. But clearly, there is a lot to watch over the next several days. And this storm is in no way, shape, or form nailed down or set in stone. Again, the model guidance will likely flip several times before we get an honest solution because of the lack of data over the Pacific, and that the position of this upper level low is so important. So keep an eye on this storm, because you know I will, and make sure to visit NYNJPA Weather through the weekend for the latest updates. Thank you for visiting NYNJPA Weather. I'm meteorologist Stephen DiMartino. Have an excellent day.